Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Haunting Rose, where dark tales bloom and eerie whispers take root in your imagination. If you love spine-tingling stories that keep you on edge, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our growing garden of fear. Like the video to show your love for the macabre, and leave a comment below with your thoughts or your own chilling experiences. Your support keeps the darkness alive. Now, let's step into the shadows together. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, nothing out of the ordinary. Just me, on my usual bus ride home, heading through the sleepy streets of a forgotten corner of the city. The kind of place where the streetlights flicker a little too much and the corners are darker than they should be. The bus was nearly empty, save for a few scattered passengers, each absorbed in their own worlds. The gentle hum of the engine and the low hiss of the brakes was almost hypnotic, the rhythm comforting in its monotony. I was tired from work, barely awake after a long day of staring at a screen, making calculations and navigating through endless meetings. The warm glow of the streetlights passing by outside was beginning to make my eyelids heavy, but as the bus glided down the winding streets, something started to feel off. At first, it was just a small thing, a fleeting sensation in the back of my mind. I shook it off. I've always been a bit of an introvert. I like the quiet, the solitude, but that night, the quiet seemed different. The hum of the bus was too soft, the shadows in the corners too deep. I tried to ignore it. After all, the bus ride was just an ordinary part of my routine. I wasn't expecting anything unusual to happen, but then I saw her. She was sitting across from me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection in the glass, or the way the streetlights outside were playing with my tired eyes. But no, as the bus jerked around a corner, I looked again, and there she was, sitting in the seat across from me, almost exactly like me. I blinked, then rubbed my eyes, convinced that I was seeing things. I hadn't had much sleep recently, so it was entirely possible that my mind was playing tricks. But when I looked back, she was still there, staring straight ahead. Her features were strikingly similar to mine. Same dark hair, same skin tone, same tired expression. The resemblance was uncanny. My heart skipped a beat, and a shiver ran down my spine. At first, I thought it was a strange coincidence. Maybe she was just someone who looked a lot like me. People have doppelgangers all over the world, right? I chuckled nervously to myself, trying to dismiss the creeping sense of unease that was beginning to build. But there was something in her eyes. Something hollow, vacant. Her stare didn't shift, didn't blink. It was like she wasn't even really seeing the world around her. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. I pulled my phone from my bag, checking messages, pretending to focus on the screen. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me. No, not watching, waiting. The bus stopped at the next corner, and I saw her face shift slightly, her lips twitching into a thin, unsettling smile. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't explain. I glanced down at my hands, suddenly feeling them grow cold. I shouldn't be so rattled. This was just a coincidence, I told myself again. But the words felt hollow in my mind. I decided to act on my curiosity, to prove to myself that I was just being irrational. I stood up, slowly, trying to maintain a semblance of composure, and made my way over to where she sat. As I got closer, my heart raced in my chest, and my breath became shallow. My hands were clammy. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Are you all right?" She didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed straight ahead, and her lips, that eerie, ghostly smile, didn't falter. It was like she hadn't heard me at all. Or maybe she didn't care to acknowledge me. I leaned in closer, trying to catch her attention. "Hey, are you But before I could finish, the bus lurched forward, the sound of the brakes shrieking in my ears. I stumbled, and when I looked up, she was gone. Just like that. Vanished. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I stumbled back, my mind racing. I glanced around the bus. She wasn't in her seat anymore. No one else was sitting across from me. The bus was still moving, its engine humming steadily as though nothing had happened. But I knew something had. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't imagining it. She had been there. I'd seen her. I had seen her. For the next few minutes, I sat frozen in place, my mind running wild with thoughts. Was I hallucinating? Was this some kind of weird dream? I looked at the other passengers. No one seemed to notice anything strange. The bus driver was focused on the road, his expression impassive. The other riders were oblivious, lost in their own worlds. I thought about getting off the bus, but where would I go? This was my stop, and I didn't want to seem like I was losing my mind. And then, as if on cue, the temperature in the bus seemed to drop. A chill filled the air, and I shivered. Wrapping my arms around myself, the bus had reached a dark part of town now, an area where the streetlights seemed few and far between, and the shadows stretched long across the pavement. It felt like the night was closing in. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting, that it was just a coincidence, that I'd be fine once I got home. But the eerie sensation that something was watching me wouldn't go away. My eyes kept flicking to the empty seat across from me, half expecting to see her there, that eerie smile still fixed on her face. I glanced out the window, hoping the familiar sight of the city would calm me. But then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. In the reflection of the glass, I saw something, someone, moving behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty aisle and the quiet hum of the bus. My pulse quickened. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on something else, but it was impossible. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, suffocating. I could hear faint whispers, too soft to make out, as if the air itself was speaking to me. I turned my head again, looking for any sign of the strange woman, but she was still nowhere to be seen. The bus crept forward through the deserted streets. The lights outside seemed even dimmer now, casting long shadows over the pavement. I felt the weight of the darkness pressing in, making it harder to breathe. The silence in the bus was suffocating. Then, as the bus came to another stop, I felt it. A cold hand, brushing against my shoulder. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The woman, the strange, uncanny woman. She was back. This time, she was standing beside me, her face inches from mine, her smile still frozen in place, her eyes empty, dead. Her breath was cold against my skin, and I could feel her presence like a weight in the air, suffocating me, filling my lungs with dread. "Who are you?" I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her lips curled into that same smile, and in that moment, I realized something that chilled me to the core. Her reflection, in the window beside me, was not mine. It was hers. My hands shook uncontrollably as I tried to pull away, but the woman didn't move. She leaned in closer, her breath icy against my skin. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone again. The bus was empty. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. My heart was still racing, my body trembling. I didn't know if I was dreaming or losing my mind. The bus continued its journey through the empty streets, silent and still. I didn't look out the window again. I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment. And then, in the stillness of the bus, I finally understood. I wasn't just seeing things. It wasn't some strange coincidence. It wasn't a trick of the light. She was me, And now, I had no idea if I was still myself or if she had taken my place. The bus came to my stop, and I stumbled off, my mind reeling, my thoughts scattered. I couldn't escape the feeling that she was out there, somewhere, following me, waiting to take over. I've been looking over my shoulder ever since, and I still hear her whispering in the dark. I had always been a fan of quiet, secluded places. When I found the house on the outskirts of town, tucked away behind a thick patch of trees and a high stone wall, I knew it was perfect for me. It wasn't much, just a modest 2-bedroom cottage, but it was far enough from the city to offer me the peace I craved, and close enough to work that I wouldn't feel entirely isolated. The backyard was vast, with untamed grass and a few ancient oak trees that towered over the fence like silent sentinels. It was everything I needed: space, solitude, and the kind of silence that only a rural neighborhood could offer. I moved in that summer, spending my days unpacking, setting up my life in the new space, and enjoying the rare feeling of being completely alone. There was something comforting about the quiet hum of the house, the occasional chirp of crickets, and the rustle of leaves in the wind. At least, that's how it felt at first. But as the weeks passed, something started to change. It wasn't immediate. It didn't feel threatening at first, just small things, moments that could be easily brushed aside. I would be sitting on the back porch, enjoying a glass of wine at dusk, when I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I'd turn, thinking it was just the wind shifting the branches of the trees, but there would be nothing there. Nothing but the rustling leaves and the dying light of the day. At first, I didn't think much of it. Living alone can make anyone a little jumpy, right? Maybe I was just tired, or maybe it was just the strange way shadows shifted in the fading light. I'd laugh at myself, shake my head, and go back to whatever I was doing. But it kept happening. Every evening, without fail, I'd notice something, a movement, a shadow that didn't quite fit. Sometimes it looked like the shape of a person, but when I'd blink and focus, it would be gone. Other times, it seemed like something large was lingering in the edge of my vision. But when I turned to face it, the backyard was empty, the fence standing silent in the darkness. I convinced myself it was nothing more than a trick of the light. The trees and the high fence often created strange angles in the dimming evening, and I figured my mind was just playing games. But as the days wore on, the feeling of unease deepened. It wasn't just the occasional flicker of movement anymore. It was the sensation of being watched. I began to notice it at all hours, during the day, when I'd step into the backyard to water the plants, or even at night, when I couldn't sleep and found myself staring out the window, searching the dark for that strange, elusive shape. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood in the kitchen, looking out into the backyard. A faint light from the street lamps outside cast long shadows, stretching across the ground like fingers reaching for something they shouldn't. That's when I saw it. The movement wasn't subtle this time. It was large, slow, and deliberate. At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind again. Maybe an animal wandering through the tall grass. But no, the shape was too distinct, too wrong. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with the broadest silhouette that seemed to stretch and bend with an unsettling fluidity. The shape didn't make any noise. It didn't rustle the grass as it moved. It just stood there, in the center of the yard, its form obscured by the shadow of the trees. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, unable to look away. There was no mistaking it now. The thing in my backyard was real. It wasn't my imagination. But what was it? And how had it been hiding there for so long? I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. Then, it did something that made my blood run cold. It turned, slowly, methodically. The shape pivoted toward the house, its face, if it even had one, completely hidden in darkness. But I felt it. I felt its attention shift toward me. It was as if it knew I was there, watching. Its presence, oppressive and suffocating, made me feel small and insignificant. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shape disappeared into the trees, vanishing without a trace. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even move from the kitchen, my back pressed against the counter, eyes glued to the dark window. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. But outside, the air felt thick with tension, as though something was waiting, watching. The next day, I did what anyone would do. I called the landlord, asking if there had ever been any issues with the property. Maybe something had happened here before. Maybe it had been abandoned for a reason. But the landlord didn't give me much, just a few vague words about how the house had been vacant for a while, but hadn't had any real issues. He assured me there was nothing to worry about. I didn't believe him. Days passed, and the strange feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew worse. I started hearing noises at night, low growls, scratching at the door, whispers on the wind. I would lie in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or some other night creature. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. One night, I decided to go outside and investigate, armed with nothing but a flashlight and the hope that I could prove to myself that my fear was irrational. I stepped into the backyard. The cool night air bit at my skin, and I gripped the flashlight tightly as I scanned the yard, looking for any sign of movement. For a while, nothing happened. The grass was still, the trees silent. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and almost laughed at myself. I was just being paranoid, right? There was nothing out there. It was just the dark playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it, a rustling in the trees, a low, almost imperceptible sound, like something large shifting among the leaves. My heart stopped. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something. No, someone, moving between the trees. But the moment I focused, the light flickered and revealed nothing. The backyard was empty, just as it had been moments before. I felt a sudden pressure on my chest, like something was squeezing the air out of me. I was about to turn back when I heard it, a low, guttural growl, too deep and too harsh to belong to any animal I had ever known. It came from behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting wildly, but there was nothing there. The growl, however, lingered in the air, vibrating through my bones. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran. I ran back into the house, slamming the door behind me, my body shaking violently. I locked every window, bolted the doors, and collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. The next day, I left. I couldn't stay another minute in that house. My instincts screamed at me to get out, and I obeyed. But as I left, I couldn't help but glance back at the backyard. I don't know what I was expecting to see, but the backyard was empty, calm, peaceful, even. That's when I realized the creature wasn't there to chase me. It wasn't there to harm me. It had been watching, waiting. For what? I don't know, but I was sure of one thing. It wasn't done with me. As I drove away, my rearview mirror captured a glimpse of the house receding into the distance. But in the reflection, just behind the trees, I swear I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. I haven't returned since, and I haven't told anyone about what happened. People think I left because the house was too isolated, too lonely. Maybe that's true. Maybe it wasn't. All I know is that the creature is still out there, in my backyard, waiting for me to come back. And I'm not sure it ever really left. I had always been fascinated by the Bermuda Triangle, the mystery, the disappearance of ships and planes, the legends. Everything about it piqued my curiosity. As a researcher, I had spent years studying various accounts, examining maps, and collecting data on the region. But, like so many others, I had only ever scratched the surface. I had never truly uncovered its secrets. That was, until the day I stumbled upon a journal. An old, tattered journal from a ship that had vanished into the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. It started innocently enough, with a simple research trip to an isolated library located on the outskirts of the triangle. The library was tucked away on a small, weather-beaten island where few people ever ventured. I had arranged to stay there for a week, combing through dusty records, old maritime logs, and other forgotten documents that might offer new insights into the phenomenon. The library itself was a relic, filled with stacks of yellowed papers and shelves lined with ancient, leather-bound books. There was an eerie stillness in the air, and the light seemed to hang in strange ways, casting elongated shadows across the room. I had been there for 2 days, going through maritime reports, when I found it. It was a journal, small, leather-bound, and worn from age. The pages were brittle, the ink faded but still legible. The cover was embossed with the words the Hesperides, the name of a ship that had disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle in 1902. My heart raced as I realized what I had found. This was a discovery that could change everything. The Hesperides was one of the many ships lost in the region, but no one had ever found its final log or any clue as to its fate. I couldn't believe my luck. This was it, my breakthrough. I sat down at one of the wooden desks in the corner, setting the journal in front of me. The room seemed to grow quieter, the air heavier, as I began to read. The first few entries were mundane, detailing the ship's daily operations and encounters with minor storms. But then, as I flipped deeper into the journal, the tone shifted. The entries became frantic. The crew reported strange weather patterns, winds that seemed to shift direction for no reason, waves that rose unnaturally high, and an overwhelming sense of dread that hung over the ship. The last few pages were scrawled hastily, as if the writer had been rushed. The words became more disjointed, harder to read. Asterisk, it is here. The thing that follows us. The shape in the fog. We can hear it now, whispering in the wind. The crew is losing their minds, but it is not madness. It's real. It's coming for us. Asterisk. I felt a chill run down my spine. The unease I had initially brushed off began to return in full force. I was alone in the library, surrounded by ancient records, but the air felt thick, charged with an unnatural energy. I turned the page quickly, hoping to find something more, something that would explain what had happened to the crew of the Hesperides. But the last entry stopped me cold. Asterisk, we are not alone. It is no longer just the fog. The sea itself has become alive, a vast, pulsating mass that shifts beneath us. We are trapped. The ship is moving on its own. There is no escape. The triangle will take us. Asterisk. The words seemed to pulse in my mind. The air in the library felt colder, as though a storm were brewing just outside the window. My breath became shallow, and a whisper, soft and distant, touched the edge of my consciousness. I paused, heart racing, straining to hear it again. There it was, faint but unmistakable, a whisper in the wind. I could hear it, coming from somewhere within the library. My eyes darted around the room. The shelves were still, the room empty. But that whisper, it sounded like voices. Faint, unintelligible voices, like a chorus calling from somewhere far away. I stood up, gripping the journal tightly, and walked toward the window. The island outside was eerily still, the ocean beyond it vast and silent. No storm, no sign of any other boat, just the endless expanse of blue. The whisper grew louder, no longer distant, but clear, close. I froze. The words were not in English. They were a language I couldn't recognize, a guttural, alien rhythm that sent shivers crawling down my spine. The sound of it, the very sound, felt wrong. I slammed the journal shut and backed away from the window, my pulse pounding in my ears. This couldn't be happening. It was all just a coincidence, a trick of the mind. But then, as I turned around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the far corner of the room, a shadow shifted. A figure, indistinct but massive, looming just beyond the edges of the dim light. It was tall, almost impossibly tall, and its form twisted unnaturally as if it were somehow distorted. The shadow jerked and swayed, like it was alive, and I felt my legs lock up in terror. Then it moved. The figure glided across the floor, its presence filling the room with an oppressive weight. I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The thing came closer, its form shifting and undulating as if it didn't belong to this reality. It spoke, not in words, but in a low, resonating hum that vibrated through my chest. Come, closer. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and suffocating, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispering voices were all around me now, filling my ears, my head. I looked down at the journal in my hands, the words I had just read spinning in my mind. The triangle, the fog, the thing that followed them. It wasn't a shipwreck or a simple disappearance. It was something else, something far darker. The triangle wasn't just a place where ships got lost. It was a doorway, a gateway, and whatever had claimed the Hesperides was still out there, still waiting to take more. The shadow loomed over me now, its form becoming clearer. I could see it more clearly, its limbs twisted and elongated, its body contorted in unnatural ways, as if it was not meant to exist in the same plane of reality as I did. Its face, or what could have been a face, was a grotesque mask of swirling blackness, with hollow, empty eyes that stared directly into my soul. I stumbled backward, the journal slipping from my hands and hitting the floor with a thud. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. But I wasn't alone. The figure stepped forward, its presence closing in around me. The whispers turned into laughter, dark and hollow, echoing off the walls. I felt a cold hand brush against my neck, and a voice, clear and undeniable, whispered in my ear, "You will join us." Panic flooded my mind, and I forced my body to move, desperate to break free. I grabbed at the door, pulling and pulling, but it wouldn't budge. My vision blurred, and the laughter grew louder, more invasive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. Then, in the midst of the madness, something snapped inside me. I realized I wasn't just reading about the triangle. I wasn't merely discovering its secrets. The triangle had found me. The last thing I remember is a sensation of falling into darkness, into the vast, endless sea that had claimed so many before me. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the shadows. And then, silence. When I woke up, I was no longer in the library. I was on a boat. The boat that had once been the Hesperides. The mist was thick, choking the air, and the sea stretched endlessly around me. The crew, their hollow eyes staring, whispered in unison, "You are one of us now." I used to believe that death was simple. I didn't think much of it, to be honest. Just an end. I was raised to believe in the concept of eternal nothingness, a void where all consciousness ceased to exist. That was it. Lights out. The end of the show. There was comfort in that simplicity, the idea that nothingness was peaceful, that death wasn't a big deal. You just didn't exist anymore. It wasn't until I died that I realized how wrong I was. It happened one evening in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light, and my car collided with theirs. I don't remember much about the impact. One moment, I was driving. The next moment, everything went black. When I woke up, I was somewhere else, I didn't know how long I'd been gone. I didn't have any clear sense of time. At first, I thought I was dreaming, or trapped in a nightmare. The place I found myself in was empty, a vast, sprawling expanse of nothing, surrounded by an oppressive stillness. The air felt dense, thick with a suffocating weight that pressed in from all sides. The ground beneath me was slick, cold, as if I was standing on something that used to be solid but had been worn down over eons. I don't know how long I was there. Minutes? Hours? It felt like time didn't exist in this place. Everything was just still. No sounds, no movement, no life. It didn't feel like darkness, but it was the absence of light. There was no sun, no stars, no moon, just endless grayness. I couldn't see the edges of this place, if there even were any, and that's when I felt it. A presence. I've heard people talk about this, about feeling watched or not alone in dark, desolate places. But it wasn't just the feeling of being watched. It was worse. It was as if something was waiting for me, observing me with an unnatural patience, something that existed outside of time. I tried to move, but my body felt slow, sluggish, like I was walking through molasses. I stumbled, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nowhere to go. That's when I realized I was dead. I wasn't alive anymore, and there was no comforting darkness, no nothingness, no peace. I don't know how I knew, but I did. I understood then, in that dreadful moment, that death wasn't an end. It wasn't just a quiet sleep. It wasn't just the lights going out. It was something far worse. A void, yes, but a living void. A place where something waits for you, something that doesn't want you to leave. A place where time has no meaning and you're just stuck with whatever is lurking just out of sight. When I finally awoke again, it was like being yanked back into my body. My eyes fluttered open, and I found myself lying in a hospital bed. The sterile smell of antiseptic burned my nostrils. I was alive, but something was wrong. The world around me felt off, like I wasn't fully back. My body felt alien to me, like it didn't quite belong. My thoughts were slow and clouded, as if something was interfering with them. I thought I was hallucinating. The events of the accident, the darkness, the feeling of being watched, they all felt like a fever dream, something my mind had created to cope with the trauma. But then the whispers started. At first, it was just a faint rustling, like wind through dry leaves. I thought I was imagining it, but it happened again and again. Faint, indistinct whispers that seemed to come from all around me. When I would turn, there was nothing there. No one. Then I began to see things, shadows that moved on their own, flickers out of the corner of my eye, figures that lingered just beyond the edge of my vision. They never showed themselves fully, just enough to make me question my sanity, enough to keep me on edge. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was my mind still recovering from the accident. But every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it, feel them. Whatever had been watching me on the other side had followed me back. It had crossed with me, and it was waiting. The days passed, but the feeling only grew stronger. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. My thoughts would drift, and when they did, I would hear the whispers again. Closer now, more distinct, but still just beyond understanding. At times, I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sensation of something hovering above me, its cold breath grazing my skin. I tried to tell someone. I tried to talk to the doctors, but they brushed me off as a victim of trauma, someone who had survived an awful accident and was now suffering from delusions. They prescribed me medication, which did nothing to dull the sensation, nothing to block out the voices, the shadows. I didn't know who to turn to. I was terrified of what I had learned, of what I had encountered when I died. The more I thought about it, the more I realized. The other side wasn't just a place of darkness. It was alive. and it was waiting for me to return. But I wasn't supposed to come back. No one is supposed to. There are things there, things that exist in that void, that are far older and far more dangerous than anything we can understand. And I had seen something there. Something terrible. Something that I'm convinced has followed me back. There are nights when I can feel it again. Its presence in the room, just behind me, its cold fingers grazing my neck, its whispers just out of earshot. It is patient. It waits. And I can't escape it. I've tried. I've moved. I've changed my name. I've even gone back to the accident site, hoping to feel something different, to somehow trick the thing that follows me. But it doesn't matter, because it's not just a presence. It's a part of me now. It's inside me. I know what happens when you die. You don't just vanish. You don't just slip into a peaceful nothingness. You cross over, but something crosses with you. And now, I'm not sure what's worse. The fear that it will come back for me, or the fear that it never left. The whispers, they've started again. And this time, they're saying my name. They know my name. Thank you for listening to The Haunting Rose, where dark tales find their bloom. If you have a story you'd like me to share, I'd love to hear it. Reach out to me via the email in the video description. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your support keeps these haunting stories alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and let the shadows guide you.